All right, folks, we're going to take questions.
Two questions, really. What TMZ means now to covering the Hollywood business with Harvey Levin and TMZ, and also the Me Too movement in general now, the Harvey Weinstein thing, Cosby, and all of that stuff. That's my question. It's a two-pronged question.
Yeah,
That's it.
You go ahead.
Okay. TMZ, again, everything was different before our current administration. I would have said, that this was the worst thing that ever happened to the Republic, but that's not true anymore. And sorry, everything is political. TMZ has really cheapened everything. There might be some TMZ people in here, I know, but it's true. It's things, when I used to think that Entertainment Tonight was as bad as it could get, it's so gossipy and it's so loud and short attention span. I feel like, TMZ made the nastiness towards celebrities palatable. Whatever line there used to be of congeniality and collegiality has been erased now when it's just open season and these people, they make all that money and they're famous, so it's okay, we can attack them at will and do whatever we want. And, which I don't agree with. I think there still should be a certain level of civility to this. The Me Too movement, I don't know how it's affected showbiz specifically. I think it's really affected society in a larger way. And I largely agree with it, and I largely think it's a great thing. But sometimes things are just a little ridiculous. Like when Harvey Weinstein's wife said, didn't she just say she had absolutely no clue?
Yes.
I don't know. Is that possible? Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know.
She said he travels a lot.
Boy, I'll say. No, but I think it's largely a good thing. I think it's accountability is a good thing. TMZ not, Me Too is, as long as it's not used simply to entrap or take people. It's got to be fair. There has to be fairness in the process. And I'm not sure how comfortable I am with things that are brought up that happened 25 or 30 years ago, just for the sake of bringing them up, like what happened with Tom Brokaw. I'm very mixed about what happened, because the taint really never leaves you, no matter what. Whether you're guilty or innocent, the taint stays.
Do I have any other questions? From anybody at all?
I'll just throw in one thing,
Please do,
thing.
Ivar.
I guess you can thank, if you want to thank, TMZ, because, Charlie Manson died last year, and then a few people went to his funeral, and TMZ ended up getting somebody to shoot an in-the-coffin picture. I think they did it with Elvis and stuff like that. So, this is sort of digging the bottom of the barrel, really, isn't it, with them? But,
a picture of Charlie Manson in the coffin, yeah. It's hard to get much lower than that.
Yeah, well, there you go. But whoever took that picture knew that there was a market. And so...
There's a market for everything.
Yes.
Thank you both very much. Oh, I got another question. Bill Wood. Hang on a second, Bill. Let me give you a mic so we get it on tape. And let me get Andrew over here to get a shot.
TMZ has introduced money into the coverage of stories. How does that change the way you do your jobs?
Well, first of all, I'm not doing my job very well right now because I'm trying to do other things. You should ask an au courant journalist from that point of view. But don't forget, before TMZ introduced money for those things, there was a publication called, I think it was the National Enquirer. Remember them? So in other words, there's always been an outlet for this kind of stuff, and probably it will continue that way. What do you think, Ray?
I think it happens in the larger news as well, and not just entertainment. I think it happens everywhere, and I think it has cheapened the process. But I think to some degree it's always been there. If they want a story, people will pay for it. Not every news organization would. Like it's hard to see a CBS doing that or something like that. But I'm sure every organization has their price.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something that came to mind. Now, in the old days, I mean, I get the New Yorker and sometimes Vanity Fair. Now, those publications have had to, as a result of what's happening, they now deliver their stories almost as fast as the New York Times do and the Washington Post and the LA Times do. I mean, if you want a measured, and I think it's quite good. I mean, the New Yorker, you can get an in-depth, well-thought-out story about what's happened yesterday online if you subscribe to the New York Times. So it's made publications, the more prestigious publications, really move like lightning to produce high-quality writing. I don't know if you've noticed that.
No, I have as well, yeah. There isn't enough of that. There isn't enough of the New Yorker or New York or Vanity Fair. But yes, they have had to move quicker, and they have had to.
And who broke the stories, Ray? Who broke the stories of the last couple of stories? Who broke the sexual predator stories? The New Yorker. I mean,
that's right.
I mean, it's amazing.
And the New York Times.
And the New York Times. So. Wow, I mean, it's a whole new ball game.
It is, yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you very, very much to both of you.
Thanks, Bob.
So it's book time. And first I want to tell you that the previous program that we had, Ken Davis is in the audience. Ken, just raise your hand. And he put out a wonderful book called In Bed with Broadcasting, which I've read. And can highly recommend. In fact, I'm going to give it to one of the Pepperdine students, Marissa, to take home and have a look at. The second book we're going to get to, I have not read. I'll be very honest, because it just came out, and I'm looking forward to reading it. It is brand new. It is called Of Presidents and Predators. Its author is right here, Dan Blackburn. Dan, I'm going to have you go forward here in a second. Good to see you. His daughter, Courtney, is with us, and his friends, Jamie, who you know, and Renee are over here. Let me tell you a little bit about Dan. You want to walk up to the top? Sure. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. That way you can't slug me in case I say the wrong thing. He was a network correspondent for both NBC and CNN. Dan has covered almost every presidential campaign for the last 35 years, as well as the White House beat, Capitol Hill, national science and environmental beats. He has been music correspondent. There's a distinction for NBC News Overnight with Linda Ellaby, right? And he was also contributing editor to Outdoor Life magazine, a lot of space coverage, Vikings, space shuttles, and is the co-founder of the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Awards program. And Dan's going to talk to you about his book, which is for sale right in the back. You still have copies left? Wonderful. And I'll buy one on the way out the door, if there are any left. And he will autograph them for you. Dan's going to do a little presentation, and again, we'll be delighted to take your questions. Dan Blackburn.
Thank you very much. That's a great warm-up. Boy, I don't know how I'll live up to all that, but I'll try. This book, Presidents and Predators, was really actually kind of fun to write. My family nagged me. They said, you got to do something about writing a book about all the people you knew and covered and what have you. And they didn't stop. I mean, I'd hear this every month or so. Why haven't you written the book yet? So I wrote the book. That was the inspiration, being nagged about writing a book. I'd done a couple previous books, and they were great fun. Nobody nagged me. This one was pressure, write the book or we may not cook dinner, that sort of thing. Anyway, a couple of things about it that I'm really kind of tickled about. The foreword is very, very generous and was written by the well-known syndicated columnist Jules Witcover. And then the blurb on the back also very kind, was written by my longtime pal, Linda Ronstadt. And so it kind of covers the spectrum of the book, because I have a huge section in there of people from the music industry that I've known and spent time with, occasionally played with, what have you. And then the rest of it's pretty much politics and all of that. I would point out, because there's quite a section in the middle, this is almost just less than a couple weeks, the 50th anniversary of Robert Kennedy's assassination in Los Angeles. As far as we can find, and if anybody knows different, please let me know. Jules Wickover and I think we're the only people still around who covered Bob from the day he ran for the Senate in New York all the way through to Arlington National Cemetery. So there's some stories in here that I've really not seen in print somewhere else stemming from all of that. And there's also a whole section in here. I did, over the years, did a lot of outdoor stuff and ski mountaineering. Got caught in one avalanche and nearly caught in another one. And you know what they say that you're supposed to do if you're caught in an avalanche? Act like you're swimming. Move your arms, keep that swimming motion going. I can tell you for a fact it works. Because when I was caught in the avalanche, I did that, and when it came to a stop, all that stuck out of the snow was my head. Everybody else got to find shovels in their hands and start digging. But I could breathe, and I could talk, and I could tell everybody I was scared to death, and they'd keep digging, and they got me out. So if you're ever caught in an avalanche, start swimming, because it really, really does work. I want to really open it up to questions as soon as possible, and love to hear from any of you about anything that's in here. None of you have read the book. Oh, I can nag you like I was to write it, huh? But incidentally, I should say we have a shortage of books because the publisher was supposed to send me 25 copies and in 2 boxes, and the second box has yet to arrive. So that's the imaginary 25 copies of the book. So fire away. I'd love to hear from any of you.
Dan, I'm wondering, of all the presidents you've ever met, regardless of political party, which did you get the most personal satisfaction out of meeting?
Boy, that's a toughie. I really have to think about that for a minute. Let me put it this way. Covering Ronald Reagan was in many ways more fulfilling, I think in part because there were so many Californians around him. And I even talk about some of that in here. I had, because of these Californians, I had a lot of access to him and to the people around him. They were uniformly helpful. I once asked, Lynn Nofsinger, Reagan's longtime aide, had a few anecdotes. I once asked Lynn, I said, do you ever see Reagan get really angry? And he said, yes. I said, what does he do? And Lynn told me, he says, he takes off his glasses and throws them across the desk. And I said, that's it? He said, that's it, that's all you get. He gets mad, his glasses come off, and he throws them across the desk. And one of my favorite people in the world, and some of you probably know him, was Reagan's campaign strategist, Stu Spencer. Stu is retired now, of course, and living with his daughter in Florida. But Stu was one of those guys who, if he told you something, you could go to the bank on it. He never misled you, never said anything inappropriate. He'd say, I'm not talking. But other than that, if you asked him a question and he knew the answer, by golly, you'd get the answer. And you could always depend on it being a straight answer. And on top of it, I shouldn't say was, he's perfectly fine. he is one of the most thoroughly decent men in politics that I ever met. He's a terrific human being. And I can't say enough good things about him, but I email him a lot.
Tell us about the night you were in the Ambassador Hotel with Bobby. It's June the 6th is the 50th anniversary, as you said. Tell us about it, please.
Actually, it's June 4th. I was up in the media area, which was back away from the stage, and Bob had finished his remarks and was headed to where we all thought he was going to go, which was a room that had been set aside. But for reasons that were never quite clear to me, he decided to go through the kitchen. And I was following him a few steps back, and I heard the shots. Having grown up around guns in Indiana and a lot of hunting and so forth, I knew gunshots when I heard them. And my first instinct, which was probably maybe the wrong instinct, was I turned and raced back to where we had a live line to New York. And I got on that line and I said, get us back on the air, because I've heard gunshots and I think Kennedy has been shot. And by the time we were back up, we knew he'd been shot. One of the interesting sidelines to that, my good friend Bob Clark at ABC was also covering that night. He was next to me, and he's on the line with somebody in New York at ABC in New York, and the person he was talking to he was telling him that RFK has been shot. The guy didn't believe him and did not put the line back up and was fired the next day. But it was hard. I mean, I could hear Bob just yelling into the line, saying, oh, it's real. I'm not, it's not a joke. It's not funny. It's the truth. And the guy at the other end was going, yeah, sure. So I'm not sure whatever happened to that guy afterward, but I know he wasn't working at ABC the next day.
Presidents, self-explanatory. Explain predators in the title.
Good question. Predators in this case refers to the wild animals. That's why there's a mountain lion for predators. I've done a fair amount of wildlife and landscape photography. And I've photographed mountain lions in the wild. I've photographed grizzly bears, polar bears, the whole list of North American wildlife. And so those, obviously, the mountain lion is a predator. The grizzly bear, although usually it prefers to eat grass or green stuff, but it'll, if you're not careful, it'll decide you look like the green stuff and lunch on you too. So that's where the predators come from, Mike. I'm not referring to political predators.
Not to start a political firestorm, but just a straight question. You mentioned Stu Spencer, who worked for Reagan. When you talked to him, you could take what he told you to the bank. What are your thoughts on the current administration and its relationship with the news media?
You know, I used to think, like a year ago, that it'd be really fun and interesting to cover this administration just because it would be so different. Well, I changed my mind. I don't think it would be fun. I'm not sure it would be interesting. And I don't know what coming out of the White House you can actually believe. And the relationship, Trump spoke the other day at a rally at which he said he's thinking about kicking out the credentialed correspondents and not having reporters ask him questions unless they're favorable questions. Well, I'm sure he got that idea from his friend, Mr. Putin, but it's that kind of attitude and atmosphere that makes the whole thing just uncomfortable. I look at what some people are doing, and even Chris Wallace, who used to work with us at NBC, even Chrissy, it looks uncomfortable when he's on the air these days. And I kind of feel for him because he's a really decent guy. And he's in this position which I know has to make him squirm.
Dan, I'm just sitting here picturing you with all your boxes and files, your diaries, your more recently internet files. How did you organize it? If I look at my such closets and rooms, I'm overwhelmed. How did you organize just to begin this project?
You know, I gave it really some thought. It's not just a happenstance. But what I decided I would do, and it shows up some in the book, I would separate out categories. For example, for Robert Kennedy, who I really knew really pretty well, that was a category, a separate box. Then there were other presidents. You know, I should tell you this, although it gives away something about age. The first president I ever met, honest to gosh, was Harry Truman. He was doing his re-election campaign, and he made a whistle stop in my little hometown in Indiana as he was headed for Chicago. And he got off the train, and he shook my hand, and I thought, I don't know who this guy is. But later, my parents explained to me that it was pretty important that I'd gotten to shake the hand of the President of the United States. But I tried to do, I blocked presidents. Lyndon Johnson was the first president that I was a White House correspondent for. And so I had a whole thing on Johnson and then across the board, other presidents and presidential candidates. I spent quite a bit of time with Nixon, and who was a thoroughly despicable human being. In fact, I'll tell this story, it's in the book, but Nixon was campaigning in '68. And he already had the nomination. And I was basically the bodyguard at one of the events. And so he's coming up to leave. There's a Secret Service and myself and him and Pat Nixon. And the president was ahead of them. And he got on the elevator, and Pat Nixon is still out there shaking a few hands. And one of the Secret Service guys says to him, Mr. Nixon, Mrs. Nixon is out here. Why don't we wait for her? And he said, fuck her, take us up. And that told me all I needed to know. Because if that's the way he responded under that set of circumstances, hard to think of anything good, you know. Not a very positive experience. Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you find any similarities between Watergate and what Trump is going, the Trump-Russia connection, Stormy Daniels, all that kind of stuff?
Nah, not really.
No? Okay.
It's really very different. Nixon committed a crime and was going to be impeached. While this president may have committed a crime, we're not sure of that yet. And there was no Stormy Daniels around Richard Nixon. I can assure you of that. That wasn't really his thing. But it's different. The feel is different. And I mentioned in the book, because I had covered him quite a bit, that you may recall that Nixon had an enemies list, and it was mainly made up of reporters, you know, particularly at the Washington Post. But every reporter wanted to be on Nixon's enemy list. And so one day, John Sears, who was deputy White House counsel, but a really good friend of mine because we had an annual bet on our university's football game. He went to Notre Dame, I went to Purdue, and we would bet every year on who was going to win the big football game. So anyway, John and I were having lunch, and I said, hey, tell me now, am I on the enemies list? And he said, hate to tell you, but you're not. I said, what? And he said, nope. He said, Haldeman and Ehrlichman put you on, and Nixon took you off. He said of you, you're a son of a bitch, but you're a fair son of a bitch. Talk about damning with faint praise, huh?
Anybody else with a final question? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, it was a delight.